Wait, will got it. Okay.
Good evening and welcome to the NCGE webinar series for the 22-23 school year. My name is Julie Wakefield and I'm the Professional Development Coordinator for NCGE and the Resource Specialist. The National Council for Geographic Education believes that geography education is a bridge to a better understanding and appreciation of all subject matters. NCGE is a nonprofit organization that's committed to ensuring that all students graduate with the knowledge, perspectives, and skills to make informed decisions as they go through life. They support all educators in their desire to create engaging, authentic, inquiry-based learning experiences for the students at all levels. Tonight's webinar, in partnership with the Institute for Middle East Studies at George Washington University, we have Dr. Graham Cornwell, who is the Assistant Dean for Research at George Washington University's Elliott School for International Affairs. He's got a great presentation called Identity and Geography in Morocco in the 2022 World Cup. This talk, we're going to look at Morocco and its complicated cultural geography, so there's going to be a lot going on. Dr. Cornwell, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing this, and I look forward to hearing about this. It's all yours.
Terrific. Thank you, Julie, so much. Thanks to folks joining out there, and a quick thank you to Teresa Hale and Shana Marshall at the Institute for Middle East Studies at GW for helping set this up and helping me kind of frame the talk, and Teresa really helped with digging up some of the images that we'll see today. So I want to use soccer to talk about imagined geographies and identity. We'll use the 2022 World Cup to think about really the construction of the Middle East as a region in a way. We'll talk about how identities move, how identities matter and how they move kind of across space, and they're defined sometimes extraterritorially. A couple times refer to imagined geographies. I assume we have some geographers or geography teachers, maybe a lot in here. I'm a historian myself by training, but you know, when I say imagined geographies, what I really mean is the different perceptions of space that are created through different texts, discourses, symbols, images, you know, even maps. And I'm happy to talk more about that if there are questions, but just sort of to lay a groundwork. So let's talk a little bit about Morocco. Morocco is a country of 37 million people. 5 that live in the country itself. It has 5 million what we call foreign residents, résidents étrangers, who live sort of in the diaspora, primarily in Europe. And a lot of those people still vote in Moroccan elections and keep some form of citizenship in Morocco itself. Its World Cup team in the 2022 World Cup, hosted in Qatar and the Persian or Arabian Gulf, was mixed pretty evenly between the domestic and the diaspora. So 14 players in the roster were born outside of the country. 12 were born inside the country. The most dramatic goals or sort of moments of the team's very remarkable run to the World Cup semifinal, which will more or less be the subject of the talk today, were scored one by Achraf Hakimi, who was born in Madrid, to defeat Spain on penalty kicks, and by Youssef Nassiri, scored the lone goal in the quarterfinal win over Portugal. Nassiri was born in Fez, but has played in Spain for most of his professional career. And Hakimi, of course, plays in Paris for the huge club PSG, one of the wealthiest clubs in the world, owned by the Qatar Sports Group, by the way. You know, sort of setting this up in contrast, the previous World Cup, which Morocco also qualified for, the first time in 20 years, they qualified. Morocco played a really tough first round, really competitive, but didn't advance. They played also against Spain and Portugal and against Iran. And on that team, every single member of the roster was born outside of Morocco, every single one. At the time, this created some sort of consternation inside Morocco, and a little bit in Europe, I should say, where it was sort of used as proof that North African migrants were not really French, Spanish, Belgian, Dutch. Could never fully assimilate. They would always have this connection back to their homeland. In Morocco, though, critics saw the team's lack of success sort of as the flip side, as evidence that the players didn't really care enough about the cause. They weren't sufficiently Moroccan. There was no such issue this time around. The stories that came out of this tournament were really about how sort of quintessentially Moroccan this team was, how it sort of symbolized what Morocco was in 2022, what it meant to be Moroccan in 2022. And it didn't stop there. Depending on your perspective, your personal background, Morocco came to stand for the Arab world, the Middle East, Africa, Amazigh or Berber, the Berber world, the first of all these places, first team from all these places and backgrounds to make it to the World Cup semifinal, to make it this far in a World Cup. For trivia purposes, I'll note that it's not the first Muslim majority country to make the semifinals. Turkey made it in 2002. And I think we could even make an argument, and I'll sort of tease that a little bit today, that this was some kind of post-colonial first, the first country to be colonized by European power in the 20th century to make a semifinal. Maybe it's a stretch, but I think that post-colonial narrative, that anti-colonial narrative, is a story that matters, because en route to the semifinal, as you may know if there are any soccer fans here, Morocco defeated Spain, defeated Portugal, defeated France, all three of which had significant imperial holdings in Morocco. I mean, Portugal's not since the 17th century, but Spain and France controlled Morocco from 1912 to 1956. Okay, so if it's the first Arab, it's the first African, the first Berber, Middle Eastern, team to make the World Cup semifinals. If we look at it another way, it was the seventh Mediterranean country to make the semifinals. Less remarkable, in other words, which leads me to what I want to do. I want to pick apart how we construct the imaginative geography of Morocco, of where it is in the world, and what we learn about Moroccan identity and society when we sort of change and shift our regional frame of analysis. Thus, if we think of Morocco as a Mediterranean country, which it undoubtedly is, its northern coast flanks the entrance to the Mediterranean from the Atlantic, the Strait of Gibraltar, then the achievement is less remarkable, For example, Croatia, two very impressive runs in the previous two World Cups, to the semifinal and final, respectively. Very much its biggest ever achievements as a soccer country. But the conversation is focused then on how small it is, how small its population is. Wow, what an amazing soccer team they put together for a population of only, I don't know, what are there, 7 million people in Croatia or something? The per capita strength of the Croatian team. It's not about, how remarkable it is that a Balkan country or Central European country or a former Ottoman province could make such a run. So I'm letting the comparison run a little wild here between Morocco and Croatia, but it's kind of an exercise, and I think we can ground this in some maps. Before I throw a couple maps up, I would generally sort of put out there to a class at this point to ask what you know about Morocco's geographic location, where it sits in the world. I think there are a lot of different impressions about Morocco that come from popular media. Maybe people have seen Casablanca. Maybe people have seen any number of movies that were filmed there over the years, most of whom have a desert setting. And I want to give an example. I don't know if anyone saw this movie, Allied, from 2016, starring Brad Pitt and Marion Cotillard here. It wasn't the worst movie I've ever seen. kind of a ripoff of Casablanca, actually, but they play two spies who fall in love, and the night before their huge mission, their whatever maneuver that they're going to pull, like assassinating some German courier or something, I can't remember, they can't sleep, and one of them says to the other, "Hey, do you want to take a drive, like just to get out and get things off our mind?" So they go for a drive out into the desert. They get caught in a sandstorm in their car. They are intimate with each other during the sandstorm. Sandstorm blows over, and you're like, they're back in Casablanca. And they, execute this mission the next day. Well, in 2023, it takes, on a good day with Moroccan, fairly good Moroccan roads, about 9.5 or 10 hours to get from Casablanca by car to the desert. In 1942 or 43, it probably took 3 days at best to get there. My point is that people bring this idea of Morocco as desert. Morocco is arid, is exotic, camels, palm tree oases. And part of that is what kind of connects Morocco to the Middle East. It's part of Morocco's imagined geography that it looks this way. Whereas the region around Casablanca, it's very flat, it's very fertile. It's actually really quite green from Casablanca all the way north to Tangier and a few hundred miles inland. This was the territory that France actually sought when it came in as a colonial power. I called it Maroc utile, or like the useful Morocco. What we can do with this to create a new breadbasket or a really rich agricultural area to feed France. So when we think about France's or Morocco's location, where it really is on a map, it sits in this very unique, complex Venn diagram. And this is another exercise that I think is great with students, is thinking about all these, picking a country or even a US state and having them sort of imagine the Venn diagrams it sits in. So with Morocco, for example, of course, it's one circle is Middle East, another circle is Africa, another's Mediterranean. But I think we can also add Arab world, we can add Islamic world, we can add the Sahara, we can add the Amazigh speaking world, the Berber speaking world, and I'll talk more about who the Amazigh people are and why it matters later today. We can also add Europe. We can also add the Atlantic world. Morocco has a huge Atlantic world coastline. If we look at the bottom sort of right corner of this map, we see kind of from when this blue band extends across the Atlantic, and this is a map from the early 19th century, and hits Africa north. I mean, that's all Morocco. So it's a massive Atlantic coast. And Morocco is really the only country that sits in the middle of this particular Venn diagram. I mean, we could even limit the number of circles that we're including and still have Morocco at the center. And I think it's an interesting exercise to do this with, I don't know, any other country, really. We could do it with Italy. We could do it with Turkey. Some will have more complex groups of circles than others, but it helps us think about all the different imagined geographies we have about what it means to be European, what it means to be Mediterranean, and what's in the middle of this circle is the unique and specific place that we're talking about. I think the World Cup helps us see Morocco in this Venn diagram right in the middle in a super fascinating way. And it's the first time I've really found a moment as a historian of Morocco that encapsulated all these processes, all these sort of pulls on Morocco's sense of self in one place. Okay. All right. So from here, what I'm going to do is break down each kind of these big circles that go into this, of which Morocco sits at the middle of. What are all these big, these big circles? So Morocco, the first Middle Eastern country to make it to the World Cup semifinals / the first Arab country to make it to the semifinals. The slash is important. You know, you see maps of the Arab world, see maps of the Middle East. Here's a map of Encyclopedia Britannica of the Middle East that do not include Morocco. It happens all the time. I don't have a value judgment on this, but it's always interesting to see how people define Morocco. The Middle East Studies Association of North America defines the region like this. MESA is primarily concerned with the area that encompasses Iran, Turkey, Afghanistan, Israel, Pakistan, and the countries of the Arab world and their diasporas. So, you know, that includes plenty of Latin America, or at least peoples in Latin America, from the 7th century to modern times. So that's inclusive of Morocco. But here we have a definition that is not. Sometimes we'll see, of course, Middle East and North Africa, which, you know, therefore would include Morocco. If we're mapping the Arab world broadly, so we would have something that looked more like this. Places that speak Arabic as their primary language, to include potentially Comoros Island somewhere down in the Indian Ocean, just off screen. If we're, and I think we have this issue sometimes where we are conflating Arab and Middle East, and that's where Morocco could play a really interesting role. Is Morocco the Middle East? It's the furthest west in the Middle East. It's not really east of anything. I mean, it's east of some things, but it's east of the Atlantic Ocean. You know, its full sort of formal name is al-Maghreb al-Aqsa, which literally means the furthest west. And in that name, we see, you know, this name comes from the westward expansion of the Arab peoples starting in the 7th century, and referring to this place that is the very limit of kind of the known world, the Muslim world, on the Atlantic coast. It's the furthest west. It also, Maghreb, you know, also kind of refers to the place where the sun sets, and is in contrast to Mashriq, which would be like what we now refer to as, you know, Jordan, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, etc. This is where it gets interesting. So we're talking about Qatar, and through the World Cup, we saw all these Arab countries sort of turn out for Morocco. All these countries that had qualified, their fans would join Moroccan fans in the stadiums, you know, rooting for Morocco, even though their teams had been knocked out. Qatari fans certainly took to the Moroccan team, unsurprisingly. You know, they sort of became the cause célèbre of the Arab world during the World Cup. Well, Qatar is further from Morocco, or Morocco is further from Qatar than it is from Puerto Rico. But they're very far apart. They're not close at all geographically. And, you know, I mean, they're not part of the same like actual continent. So it's a great illustration of the Middle East is constructed on, you know, cultural linguistic terms. Like there are real connections that make this a cohesive region, that give it meaning and power, but, you know, they're not necessarily based on physical geography. In Morocco itself, Arabic, yes, remains the lingua franca. It's what most people study, but French is really important. The legacy of colonialism lives on, and, you know, elites speak French. You know, someone who's reasonably educated would be expected to speak French. Moroccans are also, in general, painting with a broad brush, but are incredible linguists, and many speak many languages. But this very strong sense of Arab identity, you know, comes out of the nationalist movement, comes out of the 1940s and 50s, when Moroccan nationalists are looking to Cairo, they're looking to Beirut, they're even going to these places, setting up offices where they can advocate for Moroccan independence, and they're defining the sense of national identity that will, you know, eventually start pushing against the French, protesting, and eventually, you know, violently rebelling against the French. They're pushing a national identity that is Arabic speaking, that is Muslim, and and it's a little bit in contrast to some other elements of national identity that are alternative definitions, we should say. With music, films, media, these still heavily come from the Middle East, Egypt in particular. That is changing, but Morocco still sort of takes a lot of cues culturally from those places. And then I'd say, so when we say Arab versus Middle Eastern, what's the difference? Why does it matter? Basically, we're just referring to places that speak Arabic. I think so. When we say Arab world, we wouldn't include Iran, we wouldn't include Turkey. When we say Middle East, we'd probably include those places. And I think it's more likely, Morocco is going to be part of the Arab world. Some people are going to say it's not Middle Eastern. I would say that they're splitting hairs, but yeah. Anyway, okay. So it's the first country in the Arab world to qualify for this, or to make it to the semifinals as well. From there, we turn to this Amazigh identity. It's the first Amazigh country to make it to the semifinals. You saw this come out from Amazigh nationalists, or Amazigh activists, I guess would be a better word, during the World Cup run. Who are the Amazigh? I mean, it's the term that is preferred for Berber. So Berber is maybe a term people know better. In general, that's seen as a little bit derogatory. It comes from the word barbarian. It is still used somewhat commonly, but a more kind of politically correct or acceptable term is Amazigh, which means the free people. And in North Africa, there are, pull up my map here, sorry. Many Amazigh groups, many dialects of Amazigh languages. Some are closer than others. Here we have a map of Morocco, and really, three main regions of three main dialects that all differ across space, but three main dialects of Amazigh languages in Morocco. In the north, where Tetuan and near Tetuan, or Al Hoceima, is Tarafit. In the sort of Middle Atlas region here is Tamazight, and then across the bottom is Tashlhit. That would be like Agadir over to Ouarzazate, roughly. But what's important about Amazigh? I mean, what do you need to know? The Amazigh people are the indigenous people of North Africa. They populated the area before the Arabs arrived in the 7th century. Depending on who you ask, somewhere around 40% of Moroccans are Amazigh. Amazighen is the plural. They speak Amazigh languages at home, or they come from Amazigh families. And virtually all the Atlas Mountains, the Rif Mountains, are Amazigh speaking. And there's very strong influence then in the kind of extreme north along the Mediterranean coast, and in the further south below the Atlas Mountains. The French colonial state was really influential in shaping a perception of Morocco as Arab versus Berber. Arab being the urban, civilized, learned population, often more like loyal to the state, to the Sultan. Berber being rebellious, mountainous, rural, nomadic, no formal written language. In practice, this is not really true. Lots of Amazigh spoke Arabic, They lived in cities, they had standardized law, and likewise, there were plenty of Arab nomads, there were revolts by Arab tribes, but this neat division really shaped the administration of the colonial regime in Morocco up until 1956. And so the nationalist movement, prioritizing Arabic, prioritizing Morocco's Arab identity, was a predominantly urban nationalist movement. And so it really prioritizes this sort of sense of Arabic and Orthodox Sunni Islam as its as part of the a cohesive national identity, to the exclusion of more heterodox religious practices that oftentimes came from Amazigh speaking regions. But also just the use of Amazigh as a language, or Amazigh languages, I should say, maintaining those strong connections to the Arab East. But now Berber identity, Amazigh identity is really on the rise in Morocco. It's an official language now, an official one of several. It's taught in schools, although not super effectively. They've standardized an alphabet for it. It's there are sort of some resources being put to it at the state level, the national level, I should say, but and it's more acceptable. It's more acceptable to write it, and it's more acceptable to give your kids Amazigh names. These things were not done, or were sometimes even illegal in the past. What does this have to do with soccer? Okay, let's tie it back. Amazigh speaking migrants make up a majority of migrants in Belgium and the Netherlands. So some things that happened during the World Cup, really interesting, related to language. When Moroccan players were interviewed by Arabic media, and a great example is Hakim Ziyech, who's a star player on the Moroccan team, plays for Chelsea in England. They were kind of derided for their poor Arabic skills. And in truth, some of them don't really speak Arabic. They maybe have they came from Amazigh speaking families. They maybe have grown up exclusively, were born or spent most of their life in Europe. So a reporter asked Ziyech a question, Hakim Ziyech, the midfielder, in Arabic. And before answering, he says something like, okay, English, please. Like, he speaks English and Dutch much more comfortably than he speaks Arabic. And to the extent that some of the players do speak Arabic, they speak the Moroccan dialect, or Darija, which in the Arab world is often derided as a difficult to understand, not really Arabic. This is something that Moroccans are quick to dismiss, especially Morocco has a rich sort of linguistic and scholarly tradition, religious jurisprudence tradition in formal Arabic, that they're very proud of, rightfully so. But it's absolutely true that the Moroccan dialect is difficult for say somebody from Syria or something to understand, and that's in part because it has a lot of Amazigh loan words. It is influenced by its centuries, millennia even, long connections, and mixing with Amazigh languages, and then of course a ton of Spanish and French loan words. So all these things have created a very interesting dialect of Arabic that in Morocco, but that sometimes this question of authenticity, what is the Middle East? Is Morocco really part of the Arab world? Have you heard them speak Arabic? And this came out in interesting ways in the World Cup, even as other countries, people in other countries were rooting them on, they were sort of making fun of their Arabic language skills, behind their back, or sometimes very much in public. And just to take a look at the map, so we have an idea of what an Amazigh, country would be, or we're looking here at a picture, and the image inside is kind of the official Amazigh symbol. And this is the map that they've drawn, or what they've colored in, is called Tamazgha. Tamazgha is the idea of sort of the land of Amazigh speakers, a sort of, and as much as there's an Arab world, this would be the Amazigh world. The places where, countries where where Amazigh speakers have resided, the extent of the use of those languages, even if, perhaps southern Mali doesn't have so many Amazigh speakers anymore, extends from the Siwa Oasis on the far west of Egypt, all the way to the Atlantic, and then south into the Sahara. And this is another sort of imagined idea about, what does the Amazigh homeland look like? So yes, within this context, sure, Morocco is the first Amazigh country to make it to the World Cup semifinals. Okay, now we move on to another form of identity. Morocco is the first African country to make it to the semifinals, another circle in our big Venn diagram. Morocco is in Africa. That we can't really dispute that. It is absolutely in Africa. It occupies Africa's northwest corner and a very long stretch down the Atlantic Ocean, down the Atlantic coast. But the Sahara Divide, the divide that the Sahara Desert creates in Africa between a sort of an Arab white north and a sub-Saharan black south, is powerful. And it resonates in Moroccan society today. And I think I can make some connections and point out how it resonates, how the World Cup illuminated some of these. So let's go back a little bit. 2011, the Arab Spring has just happened. King Mohammed VI, who, for those who don't know, is part of a ruling dynasty that has been in power since the 17th century. The Alawite dynasty. They come from a little Arabic-speaking oasis kind of on the edge of the Saharan desert in Morocco, about, say 8-9 hours drive from Fez, or maybe 6 from Marrakesh, ballparking it. So they've been in power. He has been in power since 1999, and his father Hassan II was in power for 36 years or so. So it's after the Arab Spring. Mohammed VI looks to Africa for a few different reasons. The first is actually to pull Morocco away from the Arab world, from the revolutionary, radical mass politics of the Arab world at the time. And there's this idea that kind of floats throughout Moroccan history, especially in the 20th century, about Moroccan exceptionalism. Yes, Morocco's Arab, but what makes it different? What makes it unique? Why has it been so stable? Like, we see all this change, a lot of violence in the Middle East as a region over the past, since 1950s or so. Why has Morocco been, relatively calm? Plenty of stuff has happened in Morocco, but relatively calm, especially compared to maybe its neighbor Algeria, or even recently Tunisia. And it's the ruling dynasty, the state, likes to promote this idea of Moroccan exceptionalism. It's because we believe in stability. We are vested in this idea of the continuity of our monarchy, of our the Alawis as a ruling family, with religious ties. They claim religious credibility as being descended from the Prophet Muhammad. So that's an important part of Moroccan exceptionalism. But so he wants to pull Morocco away from the Arab world, the tumult of the Arab world. No, let's tack towards Africa. We're also African. Let's remember that, and let's try to not play up so much our Arabness, our Middle Easternness, as a way of sort of disconnecting from this, these really, I don't know what the word is, I guess revolutionary radical politics that we're seeing in places like Egypt in 2011 and in Syria and after. It's also an opportunity for investment. He sees Africa as a place where Morocco could meaningfully invest. He sees Morocco as a potential kind of hub connection between Europe and North America and sub-Saharan Africa. Certainly has tried with limited success to make Casablanca kind of a transit hub between those places. But the third, and I think maybe the most powerful reason, is the Western Sahara conflict. So I don't know if people know anything about the Western Sahara conflict, but I'll just give a brief description. During the colonial period, 1912 to 1956, Spain and France divide the country. Spain takes the very northern top, Tangier, Tetuan, along the Mediterranean there. Morocco, the bulk of what you maybe think of as Morocco, Casablanca, Rabat, Marrakesh, the Atlas Mountains, these are French. The southern portion, which you see on the map here, carved out as Western Sahara, are Spanish. Okay, so after independence, the northern Spanish zone and the French zone become independent. They go back to Morocco. Morocco's unified. Spain keeps the Western Sahara, what is now the Western Sahara, called the Spanish Sahara, until 1975. Morocco decides it's going to try to take it back. It eventually does, but it claims it as part of Morocco. At the same time, there's an independence movement within the Sahara, now called the Polisario, who believe that the Western Sahara should be an independent state, not part of Morocco. And they go to war. This war lasts for decades. It's sort of a low intensity conflict at some point. In the 70s, it's certainly not, in which Morocco is really in control of most of the territory, but not all. At the same time, the bulk of the Polisario's claim and the legitimacy and diplomatic pressure on Morocco comes from members of the African Union. The African Union support, in large part, not completely, members of the African Union support the Polisario's claim for independence. So Morocco sort of making this Africa pivot is a little bit about rejoining the African Union, trying to court these countries through investment and partnership, trying to make a claim to get them to legitimize their claim of sovereignty over the Western Sahara. Now that's become less of an important point since the US has now officially recognized that claim. And that's a whole nother dynamic that we could talk about in the Q&A, because it absolutely has connections to Morocco's Middle Eastern sense of self. But it's an important reason that Morocco sort of undertakes this Africa pivot. So when we see all these countries coming out in force, Africa claiming this is sort of like a post-colonial moment, an important moment for Africa, qualifying, making it to the semifinals for the first time. It's a historic achievement. Morocco's Africa identity is complex, and it's complex because it's also become a very weird, a very difficult, vexing internal identity question within Morocco. Is Morocco African? People are asking themselves this because the past 10 years have seen an unprecedented surge in sub-Saharan migrants traveling through Morocco on their way to Europe. They generally do not have legal permission or papers to stay. In fact, sometimes you see the term haraka, or the burning, because while they're in Morocco, they burn their papers so they can't actually be deported. There's no real record of where they've come from. Some have unknowingly purchased plane tickets unknowingly with counterfeit visas that are not valid. So they transit from, say, Cote d'Ivoire to Casablanca on their way to Brussels. They get to Casablanca and they don't have permission to fly on to Brussels. So they're released into Morocco. They choose to stay. They don't go back home, whether they have the money or not. And so this population has grown. Others have come overland. The situation is not as bad as it is in Tunisia right now. Maybe you've seen some headlines. Again, happy to talk a little bit about what I know there in the Q&A. But absolutely, there is some anti-Black racism in Morocco that has made it difficult for this new or newish group of sub-Saharan migrants in Morocco to assimilate, to make a home, make a living in the country. Okay, I have a note that says if time permits, but I don't think time will permit, so I'm going to move on a little bit. This is actually kind of where the African and as I'll show, European dimensions of Moroccan identity have a really interesting meeting point here in the physical geography of the country. If we look at the maps on the screen right now, on your right, you see a few of Ceuta or Ceuta and Melilla. These are two Spanish enclaves. They've been held by Spain since the 16th century. Morocco continues to claim them. Spain held on to them after Moroccan independence in 1956. They gave back all the land around them, but they kept these two places. These are the EU's only two land borders with Africa. And so they're sites of smuggling, they're sites of trafficking, but, you know, kind of most importantly, they are sites of attempts to cross into the EU from Morocco. Morocco gets millions from the EU every year to defend these borders. And one of the tactics that migrants use is the sort of set up camps somewhere outside of these border walls, and hundreds at a time will plan to rush the fence, and everybody runs up to it at once in hopes that the police will be sort of so overwhelmed by the numbers of people that a couple will make it across. People die somewhat often. It's pretty tragic. It's pretty terrible. But it's become a huge issue in Morocco, and it makes the news quite a bit. But it's a very interesting sort of connecting point, tension point between Morocco and the EU, between Africa and Europe. And it's sort of, you know, I'm about to pose the question, like, is Morocco European? And I think it is interesting that there are these two places that are European not in physical geography, but in every other conceivable way, that are, you know, sort of intimately connected to Morocco, physically connected to Morocco. So again, to revisit this idea of Morocco, the 7th Mediterranean country to make the semifinals. Well, is it also the 19th European country to make the semifinals? Again, trying to play up that these achievements are more or less remarkable depending on how we think of Morocco. I mean, most of the Moroccan players apply their trade, professional training in Europe with major European clubs, some of the biggest clubs on the continent they played for. Just like, you know, France or Argentina, countries that also made it to the last 4 of the World Cup. You know, but of course, just as Morocco is definitively part of the African continent, it is, you know, definitively not physically part of the European. So the question then is more of an exercise. In an age of mass migration, where most Moroccan players were born in Europe, moved to Europe as kids, work in Europe today, you know, how European is this team? A lot of human interest stories came out of the Moroccan World Cup run, right? One of my favorites, of course, involved the team bringing their families along. So all the players and coaches were invited to bring their families with them. And after each win, you'd see these pictures of mothers, Moroccan moms, either on the field, in the stands, embracing their sons, getting kisses from their sons, dancing together in celebration of what they were achieving. This became kind of a recurring motif. Like, it happened once, then happened again. Then there were all these articles about it. I mean, just Google Moroccan World Cup mothers and you'll find a dozen articles. Morocco makes a big result, you know, wins a big game, cue the family photos. My favorite, though, was the Moroccan manager, Walid Regragui. Regragui was born in France. He spent his entire career in Europe, except for his very, very last season. He came back and played in Morocco 1 year, but he played his whole career in Europe, while still playing for the Moroccan national team 45 times. So born in Europe, plays for European clubs, plays for the Moroccan national team. During every single one of those games, as player and then as coach, his mother was too nervous to watch him. She had never, ever come to a game before until this World Cup. And he finally convinced her to come to Qatar to watch the team play. And so what started as a morale, as a sort of a comfort boost for the team to bring their families along, turned into this sort of amazing PR coup for the team, but also for, you know, I think Morocco sort of as a whole. On the one hand, it was a very wholesome story, right? On the one hand, all of a sudden, the story of these very wealthy elite athletes became personal, became sort of like understandable, comprehensible for the average person, and definitely the average Moroccan. It really deeply resonated with Moroccans because nearly all of them have siblings children, cousins, aunts, uncles, friends who have moved to Europe, just like these families, in search of better economic opportunities. They've raised kids there. They've tried to maintain those connections, cultural connections back to Morocco. Maybe their kids have assimilated more than they have, maybe not. The travel closures during the pandemic, where Moroccan borders were completely shut down several times, were really hard for staying in touch and maintaining these connections across time and space. And I think in particular that bond between sons and mothers, it helped European-based players seem more authentic to average Moroccans. It was something that a really intimate image that they saw, and that resonated deeply in Moroccan culture, and also for these Moroccans who've grown up in Europe, and I think also to the rest of the Arab world too, where similar migrant trajectories of moving abroad for jobs, whether that's to the Gulf or to Europe, for better economic opportunities, is something that everyone's familiar with, whether or not, if not personally, then because they have friends and family who have done so. And that really helped, kind of build the image of the Moroccan team. I have some nice photos of let's see here. Yeah. So this is in the bottom right is the coach, Regragui, and his mom. And this is Boufal, and his Soufiane Boufal, who plays in France, and his mother, who would come and dance in the field a couple times. Okay, last thing. We're close to the end of time, and those are some numbers about that show you kind of where the percentage of where the majority of Moroccans who live abroad actually live, and most are in France, although as you can see, a significant portion in Spain, especially now. It's grown a lot. Yeah. Okay. Last thing that I want to say in closing, as a historian, I'm going to take it back real quick at the end. Maybe it makes the least amount of sense to end in the 16th century. But so we talked about all these worlds: the Middle East, the Mediterranean, Africa, Europe, how Morocco sits in this Venn diagram. And I kind of maybe alluded briefly to the Atlantic world. So I've told a story about the World Cup. I want to tell you another story real quickly. In the summer of 1527, an expedition, 1527, so yes, like many hundreds of years ago, an expedition of about 600 men and women leave Spain to explore what's now Florida and the Gulf coasts of the US for the Spanish crown, to claim it for the Spanish crown. It's called the Narvaez expedition, and it's a complete and utter disaster. Everybody dies, terrible disease, cannibalism, infighting, widespread destruction of Native American Indian populations that they encounter through disease and through violence. 9 years later, in northwestern Mexico, 4 people that were of the original 600 sort of materialize in a Spanish village. And they're the only 4 survivors. Eventually taken back to Mexico City. They're the first people to have ever crossed the Mississippi River, the first, non-Americans to have ever crossed the Mississippi River. They are taken back to Mexico City, and their stories are recorded, and we have a couple versions of it. Why am I telling you this? One of the 4 people who survived was a man named Estebanico, and he was a Moroccan slave from the city of Azamor, Morocco's Atlantic coast. It's a small little fishing port just south of Casablanca. And I think this is fascinating that in 1527, we had the first Moroccan American, if you will, the first Moroccan American story, certainly. It's a reminder that Morocco has a huge Atlantic empire, that Morocco had a very established state in the 15th and 16th century that was interacting with the Portuguese and the Spanish empires and the English empire as they were expanding the Atlantic world. A reminder that slaves were coming from places as far north as Morocco and being taken to to the New World. So it helps me sort of imagine, the kind of possibilities of thinking about Moroccan identity in different ways, to think, okay, actually, wait, Morocco, yes, absolutely looks east towards the Arab world, and again, south towards Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, and north to Europe and the Mediterranean. But it also looks west. It opens up out onto the Atlantic, and there are other sort of historical possibilities about, what Moroccan identity could be, what it has been in the past, that this episode illuminates. So I've taken more than 45 minutes, I think, but I'll leave it there.
That was great. That was so much information. I've got a page full of notes and ideas for lessons for my students. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for Graham while we're got just a couple more minutes?
I'm not going to make it long, but I really appreciate your presentation. I cannot say enough. I apologize for being late. I was just taking my son to a tutor. You gave a very good, well-rounded presentation about the World Cup. One of the things, honestly, I am teaching a high schooler, and absolutely World Cup 22 was a unique event, and I have to integrate it into my lessons. And I built the unit. I started with the Qatar Foundation. They have this, beginning like vocabularies and stuff like that. It was helpful, but honestly, I wish if your presentation came ahead before me, because I stayed for a while with the essential questions, how to make essential questions to warm up, to make the student think about the World Cup. What is the difference between the World Cup in Qatar than any other World Cup before?
Yeah.
Many things you point out lovely. And as I said, I wish, but it is what it is. If it was there. Culture part, we absolutely touched it. And you mentioned quite good few things like the moms in the field. What? The new thing for me, honestly, the borders, the Amazigh and the borders. This is a lovely connection, because we have here border issues. And the good thing that it connected them with the target language, which is Arabic in the Middle East. Is there anything like what we have here with borders? So I cannot say enough. There is many points in your presentation, and absolutely this is very beneficial, and it's never too late. To be honest, I World Cup for 22, but we still can do something in my next year with the World Cup, but I just have to prepare it for next year. Absolutely, I will add more.
I mean, the point about the language and the borders is absolutely true, and really interesting, because you see a lot of sub-Saharan migrants who do come from Francophone countries, and so have some way of of communicating, but a lot of others come from Anglophone sub-Saharan countries, and are often also not Muslim, and so they're sort of lacking different kind of that social capital and cultural capital in a couple different ways. They don't have Islam to fall back on. They don't have a language to fall back on. It's challenging.
Yeah, but absolutely, I really appreciate. As I said, I don't want to take that much time, but you point out many beautiful points related to the culture and the standards when we teach the foreign language, connection and communication, culture. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So if there are any more questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for spending a little bit of time with us tonight, learning not only about some of the World Cup, but Morocco in this very interesting situation in which it sits, and some of the complications that they see and try to figure out with their identity. So thank you, Graham, so much. Thank you to the
My pleasure.
Institute of Middle East Studies and George Washington, and I hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.